Now, you've made it quite clear in the article that you've written that a lot of time has actually been wasted with a lot of debate. Why is this so?
Yes, I mean, if you look at the land reform broadly, beyond the narrow issue of expropriation, it is three elements. One is tenure security, in other words, strengthening people's entitlements to stay on land. The second is restitution, assisting people to claim back land or rights in land that were lost after 1930, and redistribution. Either those three elements have stagnated because there has simply been no progress, particularly in the last, I would say, decade or so. Alternatively, there have been, as I say in the article, catastrophic failures. The reasons are varied. One of them is that, as admitted by the Minister of Land Affairs, Ms. Ngcukaitobi, the government simply does not have qualified staff. Another, as found by the SIU, is that the government officials are lining up their pockets instead of distributing land to people who need it. Another one is that promises made are not kept. One of the promises I referred to in the article is a promise made in 2018 May, repeated in October 2018 by President Ramaphosa, in which he claimed that they were now embarking on a program that he called Title Deed Friday, which effectively was intended to place a title deed to each family that needs it. That program was announced with much fanfare, and it seems to have been totally abandoned because no resources were assigned to it, no personnel was assigned to it, no budget was assigned to it. And last, and the fifth element I explore in the article, is that there has in fact been a declining budgetary allocation to land reform. So you have this inconsistency. The government speaks loud about radical this and radical that, but in practice, we are regressing on land reform.
You mentioned in your article, and this is the title of your article, it's SA's failed land reforms. You've just discussed the reasons why those land reforms have failed. And the second part of the title of your article is the road ahead. But perhaps let's look at one of the issues that you've mentioned there, the issue of a declining budget. The budget was reduced by 300 million. Last year it was at 1.2 billion. But even with that budget in place, how much was actually achieved in, I guess, the 25 years since democracy?
Yes. I just discussed a movement of 1 year on land redistribution, which is administered directly by the Department of Land Affairs. I have not even covered questions of how much money is spent on the lease program, how much money is spent on the restitution program, how much money is spent on land tenure security, how much money is spent on the questions of farm or labor tenants. Overall, the expenditure on land reform has been going down, and monies were not in fact spent, they were returned to national treasury. So you've got this anomaly that there are big claims, but the practice is contrary. So the point I tried to make in the article is that land reform is a bigger project. It is in a point of stagnation. There is a risk of regression, and the claims that are made publicly are not matched by actions.
You say that land reform is a bigger project. Bigger than what? Bigger than whom? Has the state actually failed in executing this duty of land reform? And if they have, how should this then be addressed?
Yes, let me deal with the first one. It is bigger than expropriation. It is bigger than even the compensation elements of expropriation. And if we are to seriously debate land reform, we've got to get our gaze higher than expropriation and higher than compensation. But it is also bigger than the larger project of reconciliation. It is about the restitution of the losses overall sustained by African people over decades of apartheid and centuries of colonialism. I published a book a week ago called Land Matters, in which I look at land reform in its broad manifestation and the other elements that are hardly spoken about, like loss of cattle, like loss of livestock in general. And I say that if we are to talk seriously about land reform, we've got to look at a broad reparative project that secures the past, secures the future, but recognizes that the narrow ambit that we have so far given to land reform should be abandoned. The future is hard to predict. It is hard to know what we should do next. What I do think, at the very least, is that we should start matching the rhetoric with action so that, in fact, land matters to the government. At the moment, the evidence shows that land does not matter to the government.
And why do you believe that may be the case, Advocate? Why does land, which is such a topical, pertinent and burning issue, not seem to matter in action to the government? And this we talk in the backdrop of what we're seeing even this very day. Robbie Ridge, we've just covered a story in Dunkeld, but these are just, two locations of many around the country.
Precisely. Take another example. Recently, the government announced that it would embark on a wide-scale lease program. In other words, black emerging farmers would be entitled to lease farms from the state. The project has been a total failure and a total disaster. It's been mired in disarray from the beginning. Why? The government does not have a reliable database of which farms are occupied by who. So a farmer gets a lease, they rock up at the farm, they realize that the farm is already occupied by someone else. Another person does the same. And it is clear that the administrative infrastructure that is meant to implement the, I would say, laudable ministerial goal is not working. One of the reasons was recently announced by the Minister of Public Service and Administration, Minister Senzo Mchunu, who said something like 35% of the officials we have are not qualified for the jobs that they are doing. Another problem, of course, is what was announced recently in relation to a farmer in the Western Cape, that the person who received the farm seems to have been involved in some sort of malfeasance with the department. So unless one digs into the structural problems, the South Africans will continue being waylaid or misled into big slogans never matched by actual action.
Let's try and find an ounce of hope here, Advocate, and perhaps focus then on the second part of the title of your article, which is the road ahead. I understand that there are both long-term and short-term objectives, but what are the low-hanging fruit for people like those in Robbie Ridge and in other areas of the country who are needing land now? What are the immediate solutions?
Yes, I think that if we are dealing with an issue like land, we should forget the idea that there are easy solutions. We should accept that the road ahead will be hard, it will be slow, but it is not impossible. So, if we are dealing with restitution, in other words, claims that have been lodged, the most immediate thing to be done on restitution is the settlement of outstanding claims, and there are many of them. It is to fast-track their settlement and to devote resources on the resolution of the outstanding claims that were lodged. And you know when? In 1998. There are claims lodged in 1998 which have still not been resolved. So a dedicated crack team focused on settling old claims that are outstanding is necessary. 2, redistribution is a big headache because of conflicting policies which are never in fact implemented, and budgets that have been declining, and money that are not spent, and some that are spent for corrupt reasons. But the most important thing for redistribution is to pass legislation that would entitle people to access land on an equitable basis, which, by the way, is a promise that is contained in a constitution prepared in 1996. So we have 1998 claims and 1996 promise, none of which have been fulfilled. Thirdly, you can look into the questions of the allocation of state land, which have not yet been embarked upon. Again, we hear promises, state land will be allocated to so many people, 3,000 hectares, 7,000 hectares, 30,000 hectares. In practice, what you see is total disarray. Fourthly, the institutions have collapsed. You cannot have an agrarian revolution, which is where we have in South Africa. We've got to remember we are in a revolution. You cannot have an agrarian revolution if you do not have institutions to implement the revolution. The revolution cannot thrive in a state of chaos. You need to strengthen up the institutions, get the right people, get money to the institutions, and give them a mandate. Fifthly, the debate on expropriation with or without compensation at some point needs resolution. What is clear is that you cannot have a scenario where each and every piece of ground in this country is taken without compensation. What we need is a scheme in which some land can be taken without compensation, and those pieces of land that require compensation, that compensation should not be market-based, but it should be just and equitable. In this country, we still do not have a compensation policy. And that is why we have consistently been overcompensating landowners. Those are not hard solutions, they are easy solutions, but they are ignored in favor of slogans.
Advocate Ngcukaitobi, we'll leave it at that for this afternoon. Thank you for a really comprehensive breakdown of the land situation as it stands as well.